Magandang hapon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to our second Best Bets webinar, this time on cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, as a tool to reduce crime. Yeah, so if you go to the next slide, Fidesz, there's some reminders. Okay, this team's webinar is being recorded and it'll be available on the IPA website. We've automatically muted your audio and video so that we can focus on the speakers. And if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A in Teams to send in your questions. And there's going to be a Q&A section at the end, which our moderator will read your questions out loud and address them. Okay, next slide. Great. Okay, so in terms of welcoming remarks, I'm Tara Marwa. I'm a senior policy and project development manager at IPA Philippines. And before I hand it over to the moderator of today's session, I wanted to offer a few words of welcome and a big thank you for tuning in to learn more about this topic. And for those of you who do not know what IPA is, I can also introduce our organization. So IPA stands for Innovations for Poverty Action. And we're an international nonprofit organization that was founded in 2002, so over 20 years ago. And our mission is to discover and to advance what works to improve the lives of people living in poverty. And we do this through essentially three streams of work or three ways. And the first one is, I think, what we're most known for is that we create evidence. So we create evidence to know which programs work, which do not work, how much they work or don't work. And we look at programs that are improving the lives of people living in poverty across many different sectors. Our evidence usually comes in the form of impact evaluations, and they are usually published in scientific journals. The second work stream is that we make sure to share that evidence strategically to the right partners and at the right time to inform their own policies, their own programs. So we don't just want to have an impact evaluation and have that sit in a desk drawer, but really to co-create the evidence together with our partners so that it's more helpful and useful to them and can actually be used. And the third work stream is that we build capacity of our partners to be smart users of data and evidence by supporting their broader M&E needs and learning strategies. So we've been operating in the Philippines for over 20 years, and we've conducted over 100 research projects across the country. Okay. Next slide. That is all about IPA and myself. And to introduce our presenter and the discussants and to moderate today's session, we're pleased to have with us Rebecca Ballesteros. So Rebecca, fondly known as Becca, is a passionate social worker and advocate for child's rights and social development. So Becca currently serves as the chief of the Policy and Research Division at the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Council, also known as JJWC. And before that, she spent 12 years with DSWD, where she led the design of innovative programs for marginalized groups, including co-developing the Buklod program, which is an intensive intervention for children in conflict with the law, CICL, it's a mouthful. She also spearheaded the research and evaluation of social technologies prior to their national implementation and served as the OIC division chief at the DSWD Social Technology Bureau. So very, very impressive work, very on point with what we're talking about today. Becca's career spans over 2 decades, including work with NGOs, supporting children, youth, women, vulnerable communities. She's also completed a global training program on social protection at the International Labour Organization's International Training Center, where her final policy paper was later published in the Social Welfare and Development Journal. So we're so happy to have Ms. Becca with us. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Becca.
Thank you so much, Tara. Again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today in today's Best Bets in the Philippines. So today we will be exploring the potential of cognitive behavior therapy or CBT as a tool for reducing crimes and violence in our country. So we will begin with a presentation that will provide an overview of IPA's Best Bets initiatives, highlight the global and local evidence supporting CBP as a promising intervention, and explore how this approach can be strengthened and adapted to the Philippine context. So this will be presented by Ricardo Morel. Ricardo Morel is a director of IPA's Peace and Recovery Program. He started in IPA as a research manager where he oversaw projects in Uganda and Tanzania. Subsequently, he served as a country director in Myanmar from 2017 to 2021. He has 15 years of experience managing research for NGOs, governments, and academia in East Africa, South America, Europe, and East Asia. Before joining IPA, he worked at the evaluation unit of Peru's Ministry of Economy and Finance and held research position at BRAC, Intermedia, IESE Business Schools. He holds a PhD in public policy from Maastricht University and has an MA in development study from the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex. Later, after Ricardo's presentation, we will also have uh, several experts from the academe, from the government, and the civil society organization. We will move into panel discussion featuring voices from all these sectors. So I am also pleased to introduce our panel of discussants, our experts in different fields. The first speaker is Christian Romero, or Clean. She works with the government, with the Department of Social Welfare and Development. Christian Romero is a registered social worker and innovation strategist working at the intersection of government, social development, and behavioral science. With key stakeholders, she co-developed Buklod Paglaom, a social technology of the DSWD that supports the reform, rehabilitation, and the integration of CICL and their families. With a strong background in policy design, human-centered innovation, and program development, Green champions system-level solutions to complex social challenges. As a speaker and panelist, she will bring the perspective of government on how innovative approaches like cognitive behavior therapy can reduce recidivism, promote rehabilitation, and address the psychological drivers of youth reoffending. She's passionate about creating inclusive, data-informed programs that empowers vulnerable communities and pave the way for long-term social change. Okay, so she's our expert from the government. And we also have our expert from the academy, Mr. England Dan Castro from Ateneo. England Castro is a registered psychologist and psychometrician. He completed both his undergraduate and graduate degrees with honors from St. Louis University. He's currently finishing his PhD in clinical psychology at the Ateneo de Manila University. Since 2015, he has been actively teaching psychology, initially at St. Louis University of the Philippines, Baguio, and currently at De La Salle University. Since 2017, he has been practicing psychotherapy with adults using humanistic, existential, mindfulness-based, and creative approaches and uses play therapy with children. England is also involved in various research projects where he has presented papers in local and international conferences. While his primary focus lies in clinical psychology, England's research interests extend to political psychology, critical discursive psychology, psychology of space, critical masculinities, and qualitative psychology. He is also an act. He is also active in community work, particularly on advocating for community mental health, education, and furthering social justice. England is currently the chairperson of Social Psychology Division of the Psychological Association of the Philippines. Last but not the least, we have our expert from the civil society organization, Director Lan Byron Llanes from Action Inc. Larry Byron Llanes is a registered social worker and is currently the executive director of A Child's Trust is Ours to Nurture, or Action Inc. She earned her Bachelor of Science degree in Social Work, cum laude, from the University of the Philippines College of Social Work and Development, or UPCSWCD, Diliman campus, and later ranked first in the year 2000 licensure examination for social workers. Prior to her stint with Action, Ms. Llanes served as the DSWD Regional Community Development Specialist under the DSWD Kalahari Seeds Program. She also had a stint as a faculty member of the Don Honorio Ventura State University. Her first job after graduation was with the DSWD Field Office 3 as the technical assistant under SEEDS program, and later moved to the DSWD Central Office as the Social Welfare Officer 3 under the Policy Development and Planning Bureau, or PDPB. After which, she worked as the program officer at Consuelo Sobel Alger Foundation, while at the same time teaching part-time at the St. Joseph's College at Quezon City. Director Llanes also conducts a review session in preparation for the licensure examination for social workers. She holds expertise in the following area: child protection and child welfare, social work administration, project development and management, research generation, and social welfare policies. She also served as resource person in various seminars and conferences. Wow, so we have very good speakers this afternoon. So I hope everyone are excited in today's best bet. So finally, we will open the floor for Q&A session. So the participants can type in their question through the Q&A portion. So we have here a specific portion for that, where you will have the opportunity to share your thoughts and ask questions to our presenters. So just a few reminder, when you type in your question, please indicate to whose speaker are you going to address the question. So to start us off, please welcome Ricardo. Ricardo, over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Rebecca. It's a pleasure to be with all of you, and thanks again for the kind introduction. I'm going to talk in about 10-15 minutes about the best bets approach that IPA takes, so you have an idea of what we mean by best bets, and start with a quick dive into the evidence on CBT to reduce crime. So let's take a few steps back and look at this graph that shows the number of impact evaluations per year. We see an important increase in the last few years, right? There is a growing tendency on getting more impact evaluations published over the years. However, it's interesting to focus in the last 5 years of this graph, because it shows that in the last 5 years, we have done more impact evaluations or published more impact evaluations compared to the previous 25 or even 30 years. And when I say we, it's not only IPA, it's the broader academic community leading this research. In the next slide, we see, however, that while we now know more about what works and what doesn't work based on the increasing number of impact evaluations, we also are seeing that it's only a handful of tested and scaled programs that have been, let's say, successfully scaled up in a global scale. And these are just some examples of these handful cases. So we have the BedNets, we have the graduation approach, which combines different components for livelihoods. We have the teaching at the right level in the education sector, and of course, cash transfers. We, from like hundreds, if not thousands of impact evaluations published out there, there's only just a few that have managed to go all the way to a scale, to a global scale, let's say. And why is that? It's a long way, definitely, from when we start getting evidence to a solid position when we know that an intervention is actually working and we have responses to delivery, to targeting, and other components to make sure that they can be effectively scaled up. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to see a sort of ladder in kind of this path to scale. So first, we start with interventions that are being tested with impact evaluations in a rigorous manner, and start providing some evidence on what's working. So these are what we call, in a broad category, exploratory innovations. That means that there is little evidence that holds promise on what works. However, we move then to the next category, which is the emerging innovations. And in this category, we have interventions that have had a few impact evaluations already testing this type of intervention. We have solid evidence that it works, but we still have questions about the delivery mechanisms, the how it can be adapted to different contexts, how we can make it simpler for scaling. So we have some solid evidence, but still a few questions about the potential scale up of these interventions. And then we have a third category that we call the established interventions. These are the interventions that we saw in the previous slides. If you remember the gradation approach, teaching at the right level, cash transfers, these are established interventions that not only have solid evidence that they work, but also they have a clear model on how they can be scaled up. And they have successfully been scaled up. Best bets, as the name of this webinar series indicates, is what we are calling the emerging innovations. This is what we are focusing on in this presentation. And this is what IPA thinks are where implementers, where funders, where researchers should strategically focus on in order to move these emerging innovations into the established category. So how do we identify what are these emerging innovations? We have a criteria of 5 different components. First, in terms of the quality of the evidence, we want to make sure that we have strong evidence about these interventions. Number of studies, for example, published in reputable academic journals and so forth. Then we want to make sure that there is big impact of these impact evaluations, that effect sizes are wide-reaching. Then on the scaling component, we want to make sure that these interventions can be delivered at a low cost, especially compared to other similar interventions out there, and that are simple to implement, that they are also simple to, in principle, to scale as well, and that there's strong, solid partnerships behind these type of interventions between civil society, between government, and other relevant stakeholders. Okay, so this is what the 5 categories that we take into account when we are thinking about identifying these emerging innovations. Now, they need to check all these 5 boxes. However, the emerging innovations still need to go one level above, right? As we discussed before, in order to be established in the established category. How do we move towards that category? There are 3 key categories here that indicate where we should push the research to move towards the established innovations stage or category. We need to do research on cost benefit. We need to make sure that these interventions are low cost and how we can improve the cost effectiveness of these interventions. We need to optimize them in terms of also delivery. This is the second important category. In many ways, we want to make sure that there's standardization to make sure that these interventions can be replicated in different contexts, that they are simple to adapt and uptake for governments, because this is our best way to make sure that these interventions are actually established at a national level. And then we test the targeting effectiveness of these interventions, as well as different delivery mechanisms, including digital methods that might allow us to reach a wider target population. And then finally, the impact. We want to make sure that the impact is valid in different contexts, not just in one country, not just in one small region. We want to make sure that it's valid in different contexts, that is generalizable. We want to make sure that the indirect impacts are detected. We don't want to to risk that these interventions have unintended consequences, for instance. And then, yeah, we want to test different variations. We want to make sure that different subpopulation groups are also studied, men and women, young versus adult, and so forth. So, and finally, long-term impacts is also important. We want to make sure that when we moved into the established category, these interventions have been tested in the long run, not just a few months after running the program. Here, we are going to show you a snapshot of the 14 best bets that IPA has identified. This is not an exhaustive list. These are not the only 14 emerging innovations out there. These are the 14 emerging innovations or best bets that IPA has identified based on our in-house expertise, our networks, and impact evaluation studies conducted. So we're going to be focusing on one particular type of intervention, which, as you see in the title of this slide, is cognitive behavioral therapy to reduce crime as the main outcome of interest. You might have heard of CBT before. CBT is a short-term, very pragmatic way of psychotherapy that prompts people to think differently and change their behavior. So in other words, it allows people to recognize their emotions, stop, and before acting in a very kind of unprompted way, sometimes aggressively or violently, think through this moment and then change their behavior to a more neutral approach that doesn't, in this case in particular, prevents youth from reacting violently. We know that in the mental health space, this type of interventions, CBT programming in general, has been effective. However, in specifically trying to reduce crime and violence of youth that is at risk of falling into criminal activities or is already engaged in criminal activities, the evidence is still not yet established, right? It's as we identified it in an emerging state. We'll go through some of the studies that tell us that this intervention in particular holds some promise. So here are 3 studies that we see from the United States, from one city in particular, Chicago, with high crime rates. These are 3 different types of program targeting at slightly different population groups. They are all male and young, but some groups have already been convicted and others are at risk of falling into criminal activities. Let's say they live in high risk, high crime areas. As you see in the 4th column, the intervention also varies a bit. While it's all CBT, some interventions are more intense than others. Some interventions last more weeks than others, right? So there is some variation there. And this is related to some of the points I was making before, that we still need to test what is the right dosage or intensity. In the results category, we see promising results in the sense that we see fewer arrests of these youth, and then also fewer readmissions, especially in the second line, where this is an intervention that was delivered for youth that were exited juvenile detention center, and then fewer of them that participated in the CBT component versus those that didn't participate in the CBT training, where fewer were readmitted, right? So that's a link to the behavioral change that they experienced. In this new slide, we see 2 interventions from low and middle income countries, one from Liberia, one from El Salvador. Here, in the first one, in the one called Style, is interesting case because it combines CBT with cash transfers. And interestingly, the researchers find that the combination of CBT plus cash had stronger effects, and also they lasted longer, even 10 years after the intervention was delivered. versus CBT only that had some effects, but the long effects didn't hold for 10 years. So this is an interesting approach that is making researchers think about the new wave of research on CBT. And then, yeah, we see positive results in behavioral change as well, as you can see in the results column. In El Salvador, the interesting aspect of this was that it was delivered in school settings in particular, which is definitely a growing area for more research. And it also had positive results in reducing delinquency and absenteeism in class and improving even test scores. So here are a few emerging insights from the evidence base. I've just highlighted kind of some of the most promising impact evaluations on CBT to reduce crime. There are a few others, and there, as you will see in a few minutes, we have some others in the pipeline. But what can we learn from this? So one is that targeting is really important. Okay? We need to make sure that we're targeting population that is at risk of falling into crime and violence. The timing and the facilitation of the CBT program is also very important. For example, whether it's a psychologist or a psychotherapist delivering this versus a lay person, this is also something that we definitely want to test a bit more of, because the lay person delivery is much more cost effective and scalable approach, for example. So this is very important. And as we saw, the timing of this, it changes definitely from program to program. So trying to find a way to standardize, trying to find the right dosage is going to be also one of the key questions we want to answer. Then the pairing of CBT with other programs might actually boost the impacts of that particular program. So as we saw in the case of CBT plus cash in Liberia, this was definitely the case. So there are other studies that are trying to test this. Okay, so then piloting before rollout is definitely a must. And then if you have low take-up of the program, which might be the case, then understand why that might be the case. So these are, in this next slide, we're going to look at the research gaps, what we would like to learn. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, please, then we are going to see here 5 broad categories, and I'm happy to delve into this in the Q&A. But basically, we need to understand the mechanisms. Like, for example, if we deliver a group therapy versus individual therapy, we want to make sure that the program delivery, layperson, for example, versus psychotherapist, what's more cost effective? The intensity and the duration of the intervention, as we discussed before. Trying to measure the spillover effects, for example, trying to measure how CBT impacts the broader community is going to be a key question in order to make this an established innovation. And then comparing it to other innovations as well in this field that might be cheaper, that might be lower touch, like mindfulness. How do the effects differ from each other? And to start wrapping this up, in this next slide, you're going to see studies that are actually happening right now. They haven't been published yet, but there is a new wave of studies on CBT on different settings that is coming up and is really promising because it's expanding the evidence base in low and middle income countries. And just to say a few final words from my side before I pass it on, is that when we're talking about the best bets, just taking a few steps back, what we are trying to do is to inspire collaborations between researchers, between funders, and between implementing organizations to use this knowledge in the best bets report and try to test more, ask more questions about how CBT can actually reduce crime. We have shown you some guidelines today on where we might be looking at, where might be strategic to do more research on, what are the key open questions yet. So if we all join forces together, we hopefully can move the CBT approach to reduce crime from emerging to an established innovation. And with that, I'll pass it back to Ms. Rebecca.
Thank you, Ricardo, for that very insightful presentation. So, Ricardo's presentation underscored the promise of cognitive behavioral therapy in the Philippines as a cost-effective, evidence-based intervention to reduce crime, specifically when this is targeted at high-risk groups and paired with economic support. This discussion highlights the critical need to scale proven strategies while continuing to refine delivery, targeting, and the contextual adaptation for greater impact. This presentation is very helpful to our service providers, students, academicians, uh, advocates, and fellow government officials, especially the members of the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Council who are also joining us today in our Best Bets webinar. So we will now proceed with the panel discussion where our guest speakers, our experts from various uh, settings, from the government, from the civil society organizations, and academia, will reflect on the relevance and feasibility of scaling CBT-based program for rehabilitation and reintegration efforts in the country and will share practical insights on implementation. Okay, so let's begin with Ms. Christian Romero from the DSWD representing the government. Take it away, Chris.
Hello, magandang araw sa ating lahat. I'm honored to speak here on behalf of the people I met on the ground on how cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is being integrated into government programs for juvenile justice and rehabilitation. So in the government's work with CICL, or Children in Conflict with the Law, we recognize that rehabilitation must go beyond legal intervention. Thus, the mantra, rehabilitation, not retribution. So we must look at the cognitive, emotional, and social roots of behavior and look at the CICL as a victim of the situation in the family, community, and larger society. This is where CBT fits in by helping children recognize distorted thinking patterns, manage emotions, and develop healthier responses to the environment they are in. So one example I'm proud to share is the Buklod Paglaom para sa CICL. This is a social technology developed by the Social Technology Bureau. It is a program that was developed for children aged 15 and below. It has three components: individual and family sessions, social group work, and intensive aftercare. CBT was one of the key frameworks, along with aggression replacement training and mindfulness, in designing the modules for the sessions with the CICL and their parents. So these sessions were facilitated by social workers or psychologists in the Bahay Pag-asa. These sessions provided structured support that focuses on thought restructuring, emotional regulation, and building pro-social skills. We wanted the sessions to be not only therapeutic, but also developmentally appropriate and trauma-informed. So as a result of the pilot implementation of the Buklod, in 2018, 82% of the children beneficiaries increased their rating in the social functioning indicators, which is what we use to measure their improvement in emotion management, life skills, and moral reasoning. Meanwhile, all of the peers who participated were not involved in any delinquent behavior. Buklod Paglaom complements the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act's vision of restorative justice. That is why, in 2019, the program was adopted by the JJWC as the main framework for the intensive juvenile intervention and support center for all Bahay Pag-asas. In 2020, we also looked into the viability of implementing the Buklod Paglaom in regional rehabilitation centers for the youth. So from then, the CBT-informed modules of the Buklod Paglaom have been steadily included in the capability building activities for local social workers organized by the national and regional offices of the JJWC and the DSWD Academy, which is formerly our SWID. Looking ahead, there are promising opportunities to expand CBT integration. There's also potential for capacity building of social workers and house parents to apply CBT techniques in their daily interactions with their children. However, integrating CBT in government-run programs comes with challenges. So first is the shortage of trained personnel in CBT because CBT requires a certain level of skill and consistency, which means frontline workers must be capacitated, not just in theory, but in applied practice. So that's why in our training with social workers, we have demo and return demonstrations. And the training is facilitated by psychologists. Thus, also we work with the JJWC and SWIDB in offering upskilling of frontline workers through e-learning because sometimes organizing face-to-face capability building activities is also a challenge. And then second challenge is the need for time and structure. CBT is most effective when delivered in a safe, stable setting with regular sessions, which can be hard to maintain given staffing limitations and fluctuating caseload, especially in rehabilitation centers. Along this line, we've encountered difficulty with families to go to the bahay pag-asas for the session. Thus, we allowed flexibility in conducting the sessions with parents of the CICL at their home, provided that confidentiality is kept. And third is sustainability, ensuring that CBT-informed programs are not just project-based, but embedded into the long-term institutional frameworks and operationalization at the national and local government. So since its adoption, the full implementation of Buklod Paglaom by local government unit-run Bahay Paghasas has been hindered by limited funding. That is why we see a critical role for NGOs, CSOs, and academic institutions. NGOs bring innovative models in their practice and can adopt the Buklod Paglaom and other CBT-based programs in their own sphere of implementation. Academic institutions, on the other hand, can help in developing evidence-based modules, training tools, and conducting outcome evaluations. On a side note, our consultant for the Bukod Paglaom modules came from the academe. And it was with that collaboration with the academe and practitioners that paved the way for the modules to be science-backed and relevant on the ground. Partnerships help bridge gaps in expertise and resources, and they make our interventions more responsive and effective. So to close, we believe CBT is not just a technique, it's a powerful lens for understanding and supporting children who have gone through cycles of violence, poverty, and neglect. With the right support systems, we can help them build a better future. Maraming salamat.
All right, thank you so much, Screen. That was very informative commentary. So the speech showcases a commendable government initiative that prioritizes rehabilitation over punishment by integrating CBT into juvenile justice program. So through evidence-based practices like Buklod Paglaom, the government demonstrates a progressive and humane approach to supporting CICL and their families grounded in science, empathy, and collaboration. So I think in Green's commentary segment, she also mentioned the importance of working with the academy. So for now, let's welcome Mr. England Dan Castro from the Ateneo de Manila University, Department of Psychology.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here, and it's nice to see you all. Uh, as an academic and as a psychologist, I have always perceived children as individuals living in an adult's world, a world that demands their compliance, adapting slowly to their needs, and often fails to listen to the voices of children. In this kind of world, in this adult world, children don't simply observe, they absorb. And if what they observe are faulty cognitions, faulty beliefs, faulty thinking patterns, and ways of interpreting the world that perhaps shape or perpetuate violence, aggression, and dysfunction, then it is very likely that this will be mirrored in their own behavior. And that is the core. of what cognitive behavioral therapy is, how cognitions shape behaviors. Uh, Given so, we often forget that much of what children learn about themselves, others, and society comes not from textbooks, but from modeled behavior as well, from how adults relate to power, conflict, emotion, and failure. And so, if aggression, if violence is normalized, and if fear is responded to with control, children, and eventually adults, may internalize this as legitimate tools for survival. Uh, in the field of psychology, we have long understood that the power of cognition, how our thoughts affect our feelings, and how feelings in turn influence our behaviors, cognitive behavioral therapy becomes relevant. And the CBT, as widely and popularly recognized for its structured and goal-oriented approach in helping individuals, both children and adults, understand the relationship between thoughts, emotions, and actions. It has become a tool to transform lives and continues to evolve through integration with other therapeutic models, such as mindfulness-based cognitive behavior therapy, um, cognitive-based play therapy, and other modes of therapy. So it becomes an eclectic approach with some cognitive behavior elements involved. In my own practice as a psychologist and a child therapist, I have had the opportunity to work with children in conflict with the law, um, who have experienced complex and often traumatic contexts. These are not merely children who have committed offenses, they are children who have lived in violent homes, children who have been abandoned by institutions, by families. Children have to be who had to raise themselves in the absence of safe, consistent, and nurturing environments. When working with children, I found play as an anchor, but with a cognitive behavior approach that is contextualized and humanized. I recognize that play is the language of children, but because it opens a window into how they make sense of their world. Through play, we could begin exploring the child context, what they've seen, what they believe, and how they feel. With a cognitive approach, what I did then was to examine thoughts, collaboratively labeling what they were thinking, what they were feeling during critical moments, identifying beliefs that underpin those thoughts, assessing whether those thoughts were helpful, were functional, were those thoughts keeping them safe, was it isolating them further? And together we would keep these functional beliefs if they were those that promoted safety, respect, and empathy, and challenge those that are unhelpful, inaccurate, and damaging. It was not only about changing thoughts, it's about also reshaping their ability to anticipate consequences, to make sense of how their behavior affects others, and how to recognize their own capacity to choose differently. It became a space, the therapeutic space became an opportunity where they could re-author their narrative. To support this, psychoeducation is also employed, teaching them how thoughts influence behavior, how society, culture, and even expectations of adults place upon them translate into actions. In many ways, cognitive behavior therapy becomes a critical and culturally informed intervention, one that is not only psychological, but is societal and socially relevant as well. Notably, the SWD's Buklod Paglaang program integrates elements of CBT in their program to reduce this risk of recidivism. However, despite the promise of CBT and CBT-based programs, scientific gaps remain. One key area that needs urgent attention is perhaps the lack of randomized controlled trials or RCTs or structured effectiveness studies that would help us in exploring cultural and communal effectivity that can truly prevent crime and reduce recidivism among CICLs. While there are promising studies on how CBT works in addressing depressive symptoms, social anxiety, and substance use, especially among the youth, we still have limited large-scale evidence programs that apply CBT specifically to the context of juvenile justice in the Philippines. Moreover, there's a need to scale these interventions to take them beyond individual therapy rooms and into community schools and rehabilitation centers. We want our CBT interventions to be trauma informed, culturally grounded, and context sensitive. Interventions that recognize intergenerational violence, structural violence, and systemic injustice as part of the cognitive landscape that children are trying to navigate. If we are to move towards meaningfully, sorry, if we are to move forward meaningfully, our psychological science must inform public policy. The insights that we gain in our work with children must not remain in academic journals or perhaps conference presentations, but rather translated, no, into actionable programs, policies, and structures that prevent children from falling through violence. And in this case, this can only happen if our science is both empirical and empathic, both rigorous and rooted in actual realities of individuals. To end, I believe that if we are truly to support children, especially those on street, we must reimagine what justice looks like. That justice is not only about punishment or rehabilitation, but it's also about compassion, prevention, and transformation. So it is hope that we continue to work towards systems that don't just react to brokenness, but to actively cultivate environments where children and generally people can really thrive. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, maraming salamat, Mr. England Castro. That was very informative, no? Na-showcase niya yung paano i-apply yung theories into actual practice, given his experience as the academician, child psychologist, and therapy. So, napakaganda nung sharing. Thank you so much for that. And now we're moving on to our last speaker. We have our expert from the civil society organization, Director Llanes Byron.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Becca, for the very kind introduction. And before I proceed, I'll give you a context of what Action is. Action is a child-focused NGO that has been operating in the Philippines for 30 years. So from 2021 to 2024, we worked together with the SWD, the JJWC, with funding support from JICA to develop a life skills intervention toolkit for children at risk and children in conflict with the law. Um, Basically, the project ran for 3 years. So the part we worked with 17 organizations, no, residential care facilities in Region 3 and NCR in the pilot testing of the said customized toolkits for CAR and CICL. Um, Let me give you some of the summary of the results, which will actually prove the previous presentations that CBT in the Philippines is actually very promising. I say very promising because we've just done a pilot test in only 2 regions. And I think to be able to scale it up, more research and in more areas are still needed to be done. No? So there were 208 children, 143 CICL, and 65 CAR who benefited from the project's life skills intervention sessions. And as a result, they showed life skills improvement of 81.46%. No? And the modules that showed the best results, where children showed the most improvement, were one, financial literacy with 90%, effectively managing emotions and stress, 88%, and of course, social responsibility at 83%. So I will not give you the entire study, but I will give you the top 4 learnings that we have or the conclusions of the post-evaluation results of this pilot testing. So that it showed our qualitative and quantitative data showed that CBT-based life skills intervention program actually provide result to significant positive impacts in the lives of the children. And there were also positive feedback from the facilitators who expressed that they have experienced personal growth improve their own life skills as they had to reflect also, and they were trained so that they will be able to transfer these life skills to the children. As our previous speaker said, the adults that are dealing with the children are modeling, and they children mirror the behavior that they learn from the adults. So therefore, in the pilot testing, the the frontliners, specifically the house parents and the social workers, will also train in the use of the LSI toolkit. And it showed very much support to the residential care facilities and community-based interventions of the local government, or the local, specifically the local social welfare and development office. Um, as to the sustainability, in 2024, the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Council issued Council Resolution Number 1, Series of 2024, enjoining local government units to adopt the use of life skills intervention for CAR and CICL in the Bahay Pag-asa and other similar youth facilities. No? Um, we at Action believe that this is the first step only to sustainability, because most of the time, although programs are institutionalized at the national level, the adoption at the local level always is a challenge. No? Um, we are happy to announce that even after the project funding, we still receive requests for training on the life skills intervention toolkit, and these are funded by the local government units. So for us, it's an indication that the project is sustained and it's still being used and seen as valuable by the local government units, showing that they are defraying the cost of the training. Um, Another learning is that because of the devolution of social services through the passage of the local government code and recently upheld through the Mandanas Garcia ruling, the delivery of social services, I mean the direct services, is now the responsibility of the local government units. And therefore, for the initiative including CBT to be sustained, efforts must be made at the local level because both the mandate and the resources are now with them. So, so far, what have we, Action has already found two keys to sustainability based on experience. One is the CBT, the design of the project must be a felt need of the partners at the local level. The case of the CBT through life skills, this is actually a felt need and a clamor at the local level for the local social welfare and development offices, especially those with newly built Bahay Pag-asa or similar youth facilities that only have the building and the people but no standardized program, especially on CBT. So this is very much welcome, and actually they've been seeking support, particularly in the areas of behavioral management of the children and youth under their care. Challenge, however, and the need to be worked on are the people at the local government who are actually in charge of budget allocation. We have to make them understand the need for CBT and other programs and program interventions to CAR and CNCL. And the best way that we've seen, no, that we've experienced, that convinced them is that the positive change in the CAR and CICL, no, the budget officers, the mayors themselves, the people who are in the decision making and especially in the allocation of resources. So we believe that they have to see it, and they have to see results, no. And another way that Action does its business in every program or social technology that we develop, including the life skills intervention modules, is that we observe the participatory process. We do away with the traditional way of designing programs and projects where the experts, especially the academe, the seasoned social workers, are the one who, prepare the design, the project, and then have the frontliners implement it. At Action, what we saw was that it's very important to involve all the stakeholders from the needs assessment from the start, no, from the benchmarking up to the implementation. In fact, in designing this project, the social workers, house parents, and of course, the most important stakeholders, the children were involved. No, The children were asked. In fact, we were able to fine tune our methodologies because of the children's feedback. Yan, sabi nila sa amin, ma'am, please do not use yung there will be a quotation and then you will ask the child, "Well, how do you understand?" That's how we learn that we listen to the children's voices, which says that methodology matters most to them. So our methodologies are, we proudly say that children approve because they were the ones who suggested that it should always be activity based or play. No, play should always be integrated so children will be engaged. So we thank them for that. And also participatory until the evaluation. No? The pilot testing was actually evaluated and the children's points of view were also taken and actually helped us improve the final version of the module. So participation is important in two ways. One is it fosters a sense of ownership. No? So when we tell our 17 partners that this program works, this design works, we actually did not need to convince them anymore because they already know that it works because they were with us during the entire process. They have experienced it. So the 17 partners actually up to now, this is 2025, are still using our life skills intervention module using their own resources because one, they have proven themselves that this works, and number two, they feel a sense of ownership. And number three, the children are enjoying it because the children will also part of the development. So especially on the methodology, it's really a game changing for us, no, to learn what children want because the challenge then was children get bored. Especially children complain about the old school methodology where they feel like sinisermonan na naman kami, no? So the methodologies were really enhanced because of the children's feedback. So the participation from the designing, from the testing up to the institutionalization is very important for us, no? So for the challenges, I agree, no, and it's always been a challenge for any program in the Philippines that there are more clients, there are more programs versus the frontliners. So we hope and we keep on lobbying in our practice that please ensure that programs and services have commensurate resources, including personnel. That I think is even the national level explained it a while ago. So we are also at that point. And I would like to thank IPA because I learned something new today, which I'm very excited to follow on and see actually what happens. The mention of using CBT and partnering it with cash assistance for the beneficiaries. Because we already have a cash assistance program in the Philippines, which is the Pantawid, the conditional cash transfer. So as a professional, as a social science grad, I'm curious about what will be the outcome if we pair life skills intervention and other CBT-based program and with cash assistance here in the Philippines. So thank you very much for that learning and for something that to think about, no, as a social worker in the Philippines. Regarding challenges to implement juvenile justice, I think the number one and been being worked on by several practitioners for a very long time is the punitive versus restorative justice system in the Philippines. We've been advocating for this literally for I think 2 decades. No, we've seen changes, but it still has a long way to go. So I think the mindset, the perspective, because um, it's difficult to admit, but funding CBT-based programs for CAR and CICL always boils down to ROI or return on investment perspective from those who are in the position of power to provide funding. So it is important that we continue our advocacy towards a restorative justice system and a child-friendly society because those frameworks will be the foundation, no, of the concern and the acknowledgement and eventually, no, the allocation of resources for CBT-based programs for children. That's all. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Miss Lani Byron Llanes. Okay, so I think all our experts and speakers were able to share their comments. And before I made a synthesis of all the presentation and sharing provided, I'd like to invite all the participants here to type in your question through the Q&A. So if you are using a laptop, pwedeng makita sa taas, sa upper part ng inyong laptop yung Q&A. You can type into your questions there. Kung mobile phone naman ang inyong gamit, you can see the three small dots dito sa ilalim ng inyong mobile phone. Pwede nyo i-press yan, then you can see Q&A. So dito nyo pwedeng i-type yung inyong mga question. And please indicate kung kanino nyo i-address ang inyong mga tanong. Yeah, again, thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights. So allow me to briefly summarize the key takeaways from our discussion. So we had our sharing from the DSWD. So Green shared about Buklod Paglaom, which includes CBT as one of the main components, facilitated by social workers and psychologists in Bahay Pag-asa. Based on pilot, 82% had improved social welfare uh, in functioning, peers were not involved in delinquent behaviors. There were also challenges that she mentioned, some of which are staffing and training, consistency of the sessions, and sustainability of efforts. She also shared some opportunities like partnership with organizations, the NGO, CSO, academic institution to augment gaps in knowledge and resources towards a more responsive and effective intervention. Next, for our speaker from the academy, England shared about how children learn most of from observed behavior, which can internalize negative behaviors, the power of cognition to influence thoughts and feelings, the integration with other models, the integration of CBT with other models such as the mindfulness and play therapy. And we also share that CICL or the children in conflict with the law often have traumatic backgrounds. And play with CBT component, which is play as the language of our children. We are not just changing thoughts, but reshaping consequences, allowing them to reauthor their narratives. And also, England shared one key challenge, specifically the lack of randomized control trials or structured evaluation, which can hinder improvement of programs, limited large-scale evidence-based programs. And he also highlighted the importance of trauma-informed, culturally sensitive, and context-grounded intervention, translating evidence to actionable programs and policies. And then lastly, from our CSO representative, uh, Ms. Lani shared about how they piloted life skills intervention sessions with CBT as one of the components in two regions with 208 children. So kasama sa mga nakita yung improvements in literacy and social responsibility, the significant positive impact on children's lives, improved life skills of the facilitators, social workers, and also she mentioned about JJWC issued resolution to encourage the local government units to adopt the intervention, which is our first step to sustainability. And then it is also good to note that even after pilot and even despite the limitation of funds, no, Ms. Lani shared to us na maraming mga LGU ang nagre-request pa din ng training and technical assistance for that. So nakita talaga natin na maganda and local government units appreciate the intervention and the program. So the effort must be made at the local level, considering the devolution or the Mandanas-Garcia ruling. We need to convince more the local leaders to prioritize programs for CICL and CAR and to show them the results. Maganda yung mga pinakita. Actually, Ricardo, in his presentation earlier, he highlighted some of the documented and evaluated programs na meron ng mga impact, no? So baka magandang makita din yon. And the importance of involving stakeholders, the children, families, and other key stakeholders from needs assessment to implementation, fine-tuned methodologies using children's feedback. So maganda talagang naririnig din natin ang boses ng mga bata. No? And the play should always be integrated. And before she ended the presentation, she also shared one of the key takeaway or learning that she had from the presentations and sharing. And at curious siya about how the CBT can be paired with, and the life skills sessions can be paired with our existing conditional cash transfer program or the Pantawid Pamilyang Filipino program of the DSWD. So, doon sa mga presentation ng ating mga speakers, we noted some of the common themes. First, use of play in the methodology. So, dahil mga bata, mga CICL and CAR, mga bata itong target clients natin, it is important to note that play is an important methodology, and also hearing feedback and uh, getting their perspective as well throughout the process. And then it was also highlighted that there is a need to secure resources, both human and material resource, to ensure effective implementation of CBT. And then the integration in institutional framework to ensure its sustainability. So dahil alam naman natin that the direct interventions are being carried by the local government units, it's really important to ensure integration of CBT and other juvenile justice programs into the local government so that we can ensure the sustainability of our programs. We also need, it was also highlighted that there is a need for more research on the large scale to further establish the positive gains from CBT-based programs presented. Kasi if we can take note, yung CBT, the Buklod Paglaom, the life skills, these are all pilots. So baka magandang makita after it was institutionalized, after ma-adapt ng JJWC, yung Buklod Paglaom, for example, ano na yung results ng mga intervention at the local level uh, through the implementation of this program. So thank you once again to our speakers for the thoughtful discussion. We will now be opening the floor for questions from our participants. Again, please use the Q&A function to share your thoughts or your insights. So, meron po bang mga tanong? Ayan, sige. So, I think there is a question here. I'll read it to anyone or to all the speakers. So, pwede niyo pong sagutin kung sino ang interested to answer this question. What misconception do you often encounter about CBT and its application in this sector? How can we address this? So, anyone from the speakers, Ricardo, would like to share your thoughts about this question?
Hello. I can take perhaps the second. Let me turn my camera on. The second part of the question, as AI and CBT, I'm not really familiar with as we speak. But on the second point, I think there's a lot of promise about group CBT compared to individual level CBT. So most of the studies that we have conducted or seen published are with in small groups. And the effects seem to be holding for all the members in these groups, at least on average. And in thinking about scaling up and establishing this type of interventions, probably the most cost-effective way of doing it is through group therapy. Of course, group therapy might not be delving into specific individual questions or issues, and that might, it might not be as tailored. So there is always a trade-off, I would say. But if we're thinking about reaching a wider population, and the evidence suggests that it's quite effective to do group therapies, I think this is where most likely the evidence is going to drive us to. Anyone else who wants to complement? Over.
Okay. Thank you, Ricardo, for that. I think Christian would like to answer also the question and then to be followed by Ms. Lani. Go ahead, Green.
Hello, I will be answering about the question about on mis on a common misconception. So when we were developing the booklet, the initial reactions were this cannot be done in the Philippines or in the community at the Bahay Pag-asa because it's too clinical and we don't have enough psychologists. So it's not applicable in community-based or government settings. But actually, we learned in the implementation of the book law that it is applicable and adaptable. So when we did the modules, it was a collaboration between clinical psychologists and our social work practitioners in the ground that can translate the technical terms and um, the psychological concepts into real world or terms that may be understood by children. So I think that that is a very good insight from our implementation in the book law that actually CBT can be done by social workers as long as they are trained on how to do it. And the modules in the Buklod Paglaom help them through the session guides.
Thank you so much for that, Green and Ricardo. Ms. Lani, would you like to answer also the question?
For as for the misconception, I think based on experience, the first thing that they ask is ano yan, may ano, yung mga violente. They think that for somebody to undergo CBT, that person must have a mental health problem. And that mental health problem is particularly because of being a violent child or a violent person. So that's the misconception, and that person needs significant mental health support. No, so and unfortunately, up to this present, despite all the advocacy, despite the national law on mental health, people generally, the general population, he still has a misconception and discriminatory attitude towards persons seeking mental health support. And I think that translated also, or that somehow was passed on to the life skills intervention. That is why the same as the experience of Miss Christine of the SWD, we also at first explained what is life skills and its relation to cognitive behavioral therapy. And fortunately, for the 17 organizations that we worked with, we were able to transform their view because they have experienced it and they've seen now, they have participated in implementing life skills interventions sessions, which is actually a CBT based program. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Lani. Mr. Inglat, would you like to add also?
Hello, sorry. Yeah, I just like to bank on what's been previously mentioned about I think that's the stigma when it comes with the word therapy. So some would think that oh, it's therapy, it must be something negative, something violent, something someone suffering from mental illness. But in reality, these therapeutic techniques, are for everyone in a sense that it's not only meant for those who are suffering from some mental illness or mental condition, but it's really to improve one's life. Also, I think I'd add on perhaps one other misconception about cognitive behavioral therapy is that it's the one all be all solution to everything. But that's why I've mentioned that it's important to integrate other practices that are perhaps culturally accepted to make it more relatable to everyone and relatable particularly to one's context and situation. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Inglat, for that, and to all the speakers for those very comprehensive answer. We also have questions here from Myra. We have two questions here. First is, how will CBT be affected by artificial intelligence or AI? And what preparation do we need in upgrading CBT techniques from individual to group or community use? Yes, Kri, you're raising your hand. Would you like to respond to these questions?
Yes po, Ate Becca. So, about the need to, about how will we prepare upgrading CBT from individual to group. So, in our experience in Buklod, the CBT-based modules for the individual sessions were done one-on-one sessions with the child. And we also had the social group work to complement the the gains and the individual session. So if we'll be turning the CBT techniques from individual to group, I think service providers should be capacitated about group facilitation skills aside from the CBT principles that is provided to them. And then I think one important concept that or top technique that should be integrated in the capacity building is how these providers in group setting would manage disclosures and emotional safety among the children since it's already in a group setting. So, and then if in case there are individuals or children that need more intensive counseling or sessions with service provider, I think there should be a clear pathway for these children who may need more intensive individual support aside from that group work. Ayun. Thank you.
Salamat, Kri. We also have another set of questions here from Catherine Shera. Basahin ko lang po. Can a social worker conduct CBT even without being formally certified? Are there any local agencies or bodies in the Philippines who provide free comprehensive CBT trainings with CPD points? Anyone who would like to respond to this question from Ms. Catherine Shera?
Hello. I
Yes,
will be
Ms.
able
Lani,
to
go ahead.
answer. Yes, I think the comprehensive training can be done naman, just like what was shared by DSWD and our experience in action. Unfortunately, I do not know if there's an institution that actually certifies and provides a CPD point, but for the implementation, during the implementation of our previous project with DSWD, unfortunately, kasi it was during the pandemic, there was an attempt by the DSWD to acquire CPD points for the training. Unfortunately, we were not able to push through with it due to the limited timeline of the project. So, but I think that's that's as far as I know. So, but as to an agency that certifies, unfortunately, I am unaware of it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Lani. Mr. Inglan, would you like also to respond?
All right. About the agency, I think there are foreign agencies where you could get certified as a CBT provider, but I think in the Philippine context, it's kind of difficult. It's to really practice the therapy part of it. There are some regulations regarding with in relation to PRC, but if you're going to scale it to for other professions, other than psychologists, because based on the PRC licensing or PAP board rules or and implementing rules and regulations, sorry, um only a licensed psychologist can facilitate therapy. But if you're going to utilize cognitive behavioral therapy elements in a community program, um I think that's where and that's when anyone can actually provide it should there be no given or given that there's training related to facilitating in a community with cognitive-based elements, but not the psychotherapy part itself.
Thank you, Mr. England, for that. Pero maganda rin i-take note, no, that, for example, as mentioned by Green earlier and Ms. Lan, CBT was also one part of the Buklod Paglaom and Life Skills uh, LSI. And then for Buklod Paglaom, there's a continuing training. Meron itong module kung saan integrated ang CBT. And there's a continuing partnership between JJWC and the DFWD through SWIDB for continuing capacity building along the implementation of the Buklod Paglaom. I'm sure meron pang madami pang tanong for this, but for other questions, we can reach out to IPA. So later we will be flashing the contact details of IPA where you can throw in your questions. So for now, I would like to wrap up the session and turn over the floor to Tara Marwa to give us project development efforts of IPA Philippines on CBT. Tara?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Becca. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you for this fantastic moderation. Essentially, if this webinar has sparked your interest in better understanding the effective implementation of CBT, we've heard so many different angles of what needs a bit more evidence, where you need to pay attention, what aspects you could integrate, like play. So yeah, if this has sparked an interest, to measure the impact of CBT programs or similar interventions that reduce crime. I'm just going to explain in a few minutes how we can work together and what is the role of IPA. So essentially, IPA connects various partners together, and we can really help throughout the whole project lifecycle. So we support in project development, but project implementation and also project dissemination. So please do get in touch if you have an idea and a concept on this topic, even if it's just an initial kind of scoping work, or if it's a full-fledged program already, or if you have done some research or some impact evaluation and you want to think through how to disseminate this and how to scale it. So IPA really offers support around the whole project lifecycle. If you go to the next slide, Fidesz, I can talk a bit about our different partners. So when I say partners, what I mean is IPA is often a catalyst for rigorous research in policy. So we connect these groups that you see on the screen right now to come together and to run a successful evaluation project while ensuring that these results are actually used and actually useful. So starting with the top left, our research, we always work with academics from distinguished universities, both foreign and locally, and we really have an academic lead on everything that we do. The top right and bottom left, you see service providers and government. So here we usually help to evaluate a program or policy which is implemented by someone. So that's the thing that you're actually evaluating. And we call them implementing partners. So this could be a government entity such as DSWD, DOLE. We worked with the Supreme Court, but also service providers like banks or NGOs like Action or different foundations. And then, of course, to run the project, we need to fundraise. That's the bottom right, to bring in the necessary resources to conduct the actual study. So that's where IPA kind of works with all these different actors and connects them together to run an impact evaluation. Next slide. I think I'm gonna kind of skip this and just say that, you know, what are the ingredients that we need, right? I already mentioned before, we need the implementing partner, we need this academic, and we need a donor to run the research project. But what is our approach really? And it's really about co-creating evidence. So we used to focus on only evaluating solutions. and through rigorous research, which is usually done in RCTs. But IPA has learned that generating evidence is not just enough, and that sharing evidence with the implementers does not go far enough either. So we've expanded our support to the whole project lifecycle, like I mentioned, through identifying solutions, designing different solutions, evaluating these solutions, and then incorporating the evidence into the programs and the policies. And this whole process is called, or what we call, co-creating evidence together. So these are the ingredients that we need to do that. But essentially, we're connecting forces to help understand what are our partners' gaps in understanding their programs, and how can we fill them, and how do we also implement and scale them. So please get in touch. I think the next slide is a QR code, which also has our contact information if you would like a participation certificate, or if you don't write this down, you can just Google IPA Philippines and you'll find our website and get in touch with us. So yeah, I'd like to just say another word of thank you. If you'd like to tweak your programs and use evidence in designing new ones, please get in touch. On behalf of IPA Philippines, maraming salamat for participating in today's webinar, and a big thank you to the speakers and to the moderator for your insights and enthusiasm. Thank you so much.